이제 당연히 제배 냠는제디 아니 제배 동아 충중 충신의 검제 검바이나 아니 제배 냠는 또 숙체셔도 또 그래 대인자 저게 한직 동아 충중의 계도 세배 전에 계도 세션 동아 검바이나 고마 공배도 또 그래 대인자다 아주 동아기 리심이 동아 다운도 림비게다 세바 공고래 사실 아니 개바 전주선배게随便 냠는 개바에 전주선바 냠는 제 전주선바 남지 샘제 탐지기 된다래야 한동안 리심 동아 강도 주면 다운도 렌주 공바인자 아니 제네기 랑게 샘 남냠는 제발이야 가위에 삼어디 쪼와디기니 조금 말했을 때는 다되네 냠는 지 거래 사실 그 생각이 드는 시로와.
Good evening. So we're coming to conclusion of the first of the three big divisions of patience, that of willingly accepting suffering. So what we've looked at in the last few weeks, I think in the 14th verse, it was presented that by cultivating patience, first in relation to minor challenges, through developing habituation, then one will be able to deal with ever greater challenges. And last week we saw that by training oneself in this way, when one becomes a wise being, which is someone who's learned and experienced in the Dharma, so in this context, a bodhisattva, by this point, one will be so skilled in dealing with one's mind that no matter the size of challenge, of hardship that one encounters, one will not lose the serenity of one's mind. As the line went, the serenity of one's mind will not even be agitated.
세대래다 아니 강아지야 겨치말에 지게 동아제 녀에 유디 가르치고서 녀몽 배치고 그래서 지사다 녀몽 배텔라 근데 녀보된제 녀몽 방발이야 아니 공부를 스티 공부하다 저기 되니기 지게 쇠배 돕게 인돕게 제 녀몽 배 녀보 제 된제 녀몽 발이야 방 지게 방비 공부하고 그래서 냠내지고 그래서 녀몽은 유기라 세지 그 신티시 주로 and dene jibe kabla dene ge ane lusim je kanga dene yohadi yin bare se ju yomon yu li se na yova mang se de on kisinti ya shuro dene.
For each of us as individuals, as well as for all ordinary beings, the source of our problems and difficulties and suffering is the afflictions. All the problems we experience in this life come from our afflictions, and thereby, through the karma we accumulate, we will experience further problems in lives to come. With this understanding then, conjoining it with the presentation on patience, we see that it's imperative to be patient with hardships. An antidote for dealing with problems, suffering, and difficulty is patience itself. And patience needs to be applied both to physical hardships that one encounters, but also with mental hardships, in other words, with the afflictions, that one needs to ensure that one's mind doesn't become overwhelmed by the afflictions, but rather one's mind stays steadfast in the face of the risal of the afflictions, and thereby doesn't allow one's mind to be overwhelmed by the afflictions, but rather with the application of the antidote of patience, one transforms the situation. Tonight then, the 20th verse, disregarding all hardships, pain and suffering, overcoming enemies such as anger, such conquerors are heroes. The rest just slay those who will die anyway.
다 뇽모바 지게 뇽모바 나한테 저어서디 뇽모바디레 라시니가로 동아기 게 유디 가르쳐서 뇽모바 지고레스 이제다다 뇽모바 뇽보 땡제 공고바인자 데리 공비 갑라 안에 강아 동아 루심예 강아 뭐 용고레스지 야슈서와 데니 지사 데니 용고바자 다 데니게 삼다이도 대동아지게 네 케도세네 당도len제 서버kom제 네 냠네제 고레스지 중고로와
Again, where we are in the text, I think starting in the 12th verse, we're looking at the patience of willingly accepting suffering. And then with that understanding, and what has just been mentioned, that our principal enemy, the principal cause of all the harm we experience, is not other people. It's not anything material like our body or anything around us, but it's our own afflictions, these consciousnesses within. So, in terms of being patient or willingly accepting hardship, willingly accepting suffering, here this should be understood as, whilst not exclusively, but to a large extent, being patient with one's afflictions. In other words, not allowing one's mind to be overwhelmed by the afflictions. So this is where we have been looking for a few weeks and where we will continue tonight.
저바 당도 림픽이 시공고래 세계다 삼다나데 다 그랬던 거라서네 단직 되게 냠는 집에 갑라 강아 채번 오다 디링 다지 내슈에 밀리신 버저 톱제 덴텔이야 람냠는 고가라와 딜이야 되게 다당에 동아도 강아도 세네 냠는 마치바 샤바이나 아니 고갑지 안에 라루레스 지산디네자 디리 강아 유베네 강아딜이야 직 마셈바치 강아디 파 직당도 렌제 파세고 공부도 서로 검제되는 요모비 님보된 공부도 세배 삼다야 직제 되네야 즉 어다 되네기 냠네 제야 되다 라지분 말에 라신 라다신 되는 탈침비게 된다라 된다 개천보지 두투고래 제가 디주비게 된다려야 아 지게 되네기 동화 강아래 가려베나디 파지 당도래 배 충충을 즉 첨보 배 강아다 제수 자말을 선바 멤버제 강아데 케도 수치 배 강아들이야 충충을 삼다제 수 당도 렌쟁에 되냐면 제고도 제사디 내게 냠는 제바이나 라신이가 탈침바 산기고 어떻게 처리해 되네자디 배 마시 기체모 된다 첨부도 되네자다 되네 주야라 디레마지네 기치에서 도시나 삼다제 동아 탐지 케세 케도 세네 아니 도시네 아니 지금 당도 렌제 당도 렌베 세버 검제 되네 녀모보 방법이 년보 된저 공부를 해서 쓴 거로 동아 탐지 케세네서
So the kind of way of thinking to develop and habituate oneself to, so that it arises easily, spontaneously, in terms of the patience that willingly accepts suffering, is whenever an obstacle arises, a hardship, a problem, a difficulty, and one recognizes it, being aware that this has the potential, the potential to distract one, in other words, to overwhelm one, we immediately then remind ourselves, I have a precious human rebirth. This means I have the opportunity to cultivate a path that will lead to Buddhahood. So therefore, I must not allow myself to be distracted by these minor hardships, but rather be patient with them, to transform them and not be overwhelmed by them. Moreover, so in addition, remind ourselves that whatever this problem or difficulty or suffering is that I've now encountered, it is minor, it's insignificant when compared to the great goal that I've set myself, to become a Buddha for the sake of all beings, to lead all beings, myself and every other sentient being, to a state of freedom from suffering. Therefore, the suffering encounter, the arisal of the afflictions or whatever it may be, I will willingly accept this. In other words, I won't allow it to overwhelm my mind, but I'll transform it.
당은 지나나 지딘비 자와를 삼다면에 지레가를 된다 첨부 주에 주여바이나 되나 어떤 지 차로잡나 어떤 민의 차로잡 어떤 차로잡도 강아 제사를 선배기다 삼다 동아디네 되네 캬사를 선배 동아 되네 나 지금 차와 첨부도 로수 삼말 선배 동아 안디네게 람가레베 지 상가 첨부도 로수 삼말 되네 강아 잼제 넘균네 지게 어다디리 상가 첨부도 주메서야다 딜로리아 디리 차와 첨부를 지실로 주메서야다 디리 남시 장웅레샤 디리 실로 주메서 되네 안주게 되네게 장위 강아다 되네 차위 강아 되네게 지게 람가라 상가치면 강아 딜 잼제네 강아디 마셔봐 장도 뒤주고 말봐 내가 돈다 갸침부 침부 주여이 바이나 어다 차와나 아가야 마디 돈다 되네 주여를 차와 침부이나 가야 말씀be 삼다도 차와디 바 당도len 충충을 삼다시 계속 봐서 나 동아 장모나 가야 마디 베케 지게 딜레가 돈다 주 배워를 현다 고급라 각보레서 되네신 지교로 하다 배내는 저기다 지제모로 시스템에 강제 볼이 베기 계라 침보로 제 고급라바이나 다 지금 시장모 차와게도 어다디 차와게나 가야마 디제에 고급들이 전화 고라 각보레서 되네게 삼다도 되네게 차와게 강아지 충충을 삼다지 되네게 계도 쇠제 강아지 계도 쇠제 근데 지금 자와디 지 두고로 받아서 언디나신 당한 중에다 돈달에 어떤이디 지금 묘모 년보 때죠 공부하려야 남냠네 제가 강아学배네 류리아 강아学배네 다가야 말디 빼마시 돈다 개침부 라신이가 된 탈신비 유사고 주투야 차고래 제사데 내래 개체와 주요 말에 선배 삼다이도 어동아 충주에 나가요 말에 선배기다 다도 레진 체도 쇠주도 쓰는 공고를 해서 송고로 하다 전시선 받는 게 되는 공고로 하다 먼저 해야 되는 제어를 송고로 하다
So in this reflection, it's very good to take an illustration of people that we hold up in society as role models, as inspiration. So we can think of an athlete in a sport that we find inspiring and imagine about how this person trains. We know they'll get up early. And even if when the alarm goes off, if they don't feel like training that day, they will pull themselves out of bed and they will apply themselves. And if they pull themselves out of bed and it's quite cold and the warm bed is calling them, they will make their heart strong and they will start training. Or alternatively, it's a very hot day. That won't deter them. They won't see the weather report and say tomorrow's too hot or tomorrow's too wet. Rather, they'll plan around that and they'll train earlier or at a useful time. So what we see here is that when an individual has developed a motivation with these two components, firstly, of believing in the goal, and secondly, having the recognition that they can achieve that goal. Problems and difficulties they experience will be encountered as a challenge, something to develop one's own strength of mind through overcoming. So rather than seeing problems as problems, they take them as an opportunity to cultivate an ever stronger will, a stronger determination. So for ourselves, who have an aspiration to gain freedom from the afflictions, when the afflictions arise, recognize this is an opportunity now to subdue my mind, to strengthen the skill I've been building in meditation, the habituation there, so that I don't follow the afflictions, but I deal with them, I transform them. And do so that I develop my skill in becoming ever freer from the afflictions, so that I can come closer to becoming a Bodhisattva, a skilled guide who can lead others also to gain freedom. So this is how one practices patience, willingly accepting suffering, in other words, not allowing oneself to be overwhelmed by suffering, but utilizing this as an opportunity to develop one's skill for the sake of others.
투부자 되니 니가 두루 마차마차마도 tum부차죠 말아. 지난 표저되기 직되는 게 되는 중보이나 남사 오다 그 김제서 어디 고깔래 가요라서 깔래 가지 않는 유대 연구로와 양 그런 게직 미디어바진 삼린자 되는 연구로 아들 가요 말씀 배sam다제 가요 말씀 배파 그걸 그에 대해 직남 유대하다 지키지 두부셔야 파 충충으로 삼다 남매 다제 안직파 세바검 샤바이나 아니 다운들린 샤바이나 다 되는 세바검 두고로 되는 세바검 파 지게래 말로바 샤바이나 파주디 예루고로 봐 예루네 되네 아니 지게 소수 틀럼여하데 첨부여하다 아주 디 세고로 차고로 봐 되네자 만주기 다래나 당하게 냠내 제베네 당은 딩으로 하다 근데 만주기 추름송세야디 룡아 이수면 예제된 추름송제 준차마 직수티게 파 송고로 제사 추셔 추 직수로 직제나 남산 파 직수로 셰샤베나 대 추름 직수도 송투고 마송바 자루로 제사 되네자 델레바 페시스는 페니 추셔베나 델레아 어코전에 가야마 공항에 강한테 코마지바스 코스미키우메바 디니터는 알레시 시고를 가요 말해서 삼다자바나 수수 직수도 파마시바지 송투고로 와데 지다 수림 직수 송비기 수림되게 송투고래 델레 쇠바디 냠네 리고래 안디네 차고로와 디네기 배천로시 근데 디네 총자 삼다면 안디네기다 먼저 다들레디 쇠발 고미야들라 망고용으로 빼는 저기 가브릴리아 아직에 소식이 둘로 다디네 교보에도 디네게 안디디 둘로디 아다 교보도가 고야라 채워도가 섬리 제야지 마셔봐 심마기와 용구로와 진짜 디네 어디지 가요 말디 삼백이 된 디네게 둘로게 교보르시네 안데야 셈 미가와 마게 바르시베나 어디 디네 가요 말 디네게 고야에는 디기도 와서 몇 삼다샤베나 안디 이미디와 기 말에 이미디와 마게 반사다 델리아 셈 추마 셈 델리아 대강하디 다도렌 투야 차고로와 아 저게 지게 냠레 저 곰라제 디와 곰라게나 아직 가브릴리아 직 파소 예인도와 기시라 시지 기 서버서 아다 바시 지구도 셈벨람사 콘라 용으로 아데 양 디네 가브리 안저 어디 코로나스 시나 코로나스리 직 시나 가요 말씀 베 삼다샤베나 디네게 케도 세워샤베나 케도 세바나 다도렌 베게다 다도렌 샤바이나 델리아데 소식에 셈마초버 세발 꼼제 냠면제 토야용으로 아디나진다 데네기 총자리아 삼다만 오여들어와다 아주게 삼다베데 제 충준에 삼다베데 데네 여러와다
There are, as we know, so many opportunities to practice patience. But to actually be able to make the most of these opportunities, to embrace these opportunities, we need to train our mind beforehand. So you imagine situations and you train your mind in how to respond in them, and you make them realistic, things you have experienced or things you're likely to experience. So for example, no one likes to be spoken to in a bad way, whether aggressively or condescendingly. So we can imagine a time when this has happened. And there are times that it has happened and we haven't responded with anger. But rather, we've disciplined ourselves and made sure we responded, at least verbally, we responded in a way that didn't aggravate the situation. Our mind may have been upset because we're not so skilled, but we took control of our mouth at least. So if we think of, for example, when someone has spoken to us in an unkind manner, we think, so why didn't I on that occasion respond in kind to them? And we'll see it could perhaps be because this person either has authority over us or they have influence, potential influence for us. They can be of benefit to us. So therefore, we can restrain our mind. We see, or restrain our mouth at least, because we value this relationship. Or alternatively, it's someone that we know very well, and we know that their life is quite difficult at the moment. They've got problems in their life, and they are just therefore, because of what is going on in their life, they are talking to me in this way. Therefore, we're very understanding, because we know they're having a hard time. So we recognize here that I can respond in a skillful way, even when I'm upset. So therefore, I can take confidence that in other circumstances, I can also respond gently, with kindness, with care. And we remind ourselves that ethical restraint, the foundational training for all good qualities, this training depends on patience. For example, when people speak to us in an unkind manner, if we then give back as well as we received, our ethical restraint of abandoning harsh speech, that will be lost. We would have broken that ethical restraint. But by training my mind so that I understand that for what the reason that they are speaking to me or acting towards me is not so much about me. It is really about their mind being afflicted, and their facial expression, the tone of their voice, the choice of words, whatever it is a reflection of their mind. So they are in pain, hence they are speaking to me in a condescending manner or an aggressive manner, or whatever it may be. And then we train ourselves to see this, to know that when they speak to us in this way, it is a reflection of their suffering mind. This being before me is suffering. And immediately then compassion arises. And we protect our ethics, our ethical restraint of not responding with harsh speech. This is, we are living within the bounds of that ethical restraint. Another illustration to use. You think of times when perhaps you've felt humiliated. Maybe you've been amongst friends and they're all dressed well, but you can't afford a nice outfit like that, and your clothes are a little plain, maybe last year's fashion, and you feel a bit embarrassed. If you trained well in terms of what is important, you recognize the embarrassment arising, and you'll see it's arising about something really of no importance. These people have included you in their group because they care for you. And if you're looking a little bit out, well, you're not there because of your clothes. You're there because they like you. So therefore, calm down. This isn't important. What is important is how I contribute to the group, whether I'm ethical in their company and I help others have a positive, joyous mind. This is important. So again here, these are very common everyday experiences that we can be patient with whatever is arising in our mind, not allowing it to overwhelm us, but by using our intelligence, thinking clearly. And a third example to give is when things don't go our way. All too often, we get frustrated, we get annoyed. We wanting to do something, but now we're having to do something else. Again, if we've been training well, we've role-played these situations, we can see this in the situation in a balanced way. Recognized, it's not so important. What's important is I take care of my mind and I respond in a skillful, caring way. So these are many of illustrations of the many daily frustrations that we experience. None of them are particularly important. But by developing our mind, we can use these as opportunities to develop our skill. And by recognizing this, our inner confidence grows too.
나는 지금 나 체설 삼남에나 니제 고미야 데네 동반요 고미야 갑리야 강가 연구로 와도 되는 저기 심지어 담저 동안에 전화 선비게 니제 고미야도 다 심지어는 저 동안에 나 강가에 체수대 삼다에도 지나다 심리야 소소마기어로 삼나 저 연구로 와 심지어 신 동안에 나서 삼다여도 소소대 심리야 심교다 심지 데네 교랑을 잘 연구로 되네서 되나서 어다 되는 인지 삼단 샘교 소소나 샘마기와 차이도 강아 책도 직 that community sembe samdan na ninji komyo kokapti rago marwa 진짜 되네자 되네 삼도 어디 ninji kombe kabla 저 샘리야 저 샘 소와마기 war지 용도 연구레스 이내야 등에디 디디 가야마 충주래 현 동안고스 연구를 왕에 삼다에도 배 충주래 되네자다 되네게 소와마기와 저 전화 가야마를 디 충주래 되네게 삼다 되면은 ninji 냠는디 야기 귀네 조도 말했어 진짜 ninji 야 조토야요 말 진짜 ninji 냠는 제발에 때네 자주심에 고마워야 상주 고마워야 돼 텔레티네 연구를 되네기 돈다 예심을 두어지리야 많이 이제 삼다데 셈려 소화강아 춘직 대회네 가야말 되게 충충 시그레도 가야말 셈배 삼다베네 Tinike Kangadi Dandulin Chachagorua, Dandulin Bachagor, Chesada Dunga Dandulin, Tini, Sosuke, Nijo, Jam Nijo Comyala Sopa, Tini Murua, or do send some diada. Dimaje, that's him, Chikanjugi, Dombani, some davene, that Dombani, some Dambo, Dombani Mato, what Besamla, Chevach, Hamo, Ganga, that's teaching me that some Ganga do some Besam Davena, Ganga to Sutugo Marawa. Odini Jivika, Odini Yamne Jivika, just machine with Ganga Yungru, I did get in Lagarina, Jivika, Damo machine with Ganga Chung, I did it Chunju, Yamne, choose some Taji, Chinico, Shinru, and some Damina, Dinico Ganga the Kid suit, Dinin Yamne Chiako. Says I didn't know by Yamne Chavalam, Dine Ganga do say machine by Yamne Majiba Shaba in the Dinin Yomo Patuya, Yoma, Dina Tarata Timji, go on Yachimbo, Dena Chimbo to Tumare. Chesada, Tombani Tobaina, the name of Dona Yachimo, the Tarpata Timjiki Komo to be top 2 words. Chesa Dineza, Dona Yachimo to be a Dineza Kanga Tusi, the Mutu Shikanga and Mazemba Yamne Chiki, some died down to do send down to them. Jam Niji Komia, Janju Sem Komia, and the Chikan to get things in Shini to be a loss of Bada, the Chimba, Children, Super, something Yamlin Chibi Kablia Kanga, Juva, Suvi Yamlin Dianzuki, Lam Yamlin, Karachevine, Suvi Yamlin Yamdu, Yongoya Chago, what Chesatire, and the maybe Chisoki to share some Matana, Mida, Tunju Jawa, Lega Karachevina, and you separate go check to Ninto Gio, which I knew the men, and the Lega Karina, Pasha Goro, Dangi to Sama, some to see to a dinner that do my kid to say, do not them Kessene, Kedu Seneda, Semja Tamjig to the Rana, Share, Donda Kachamo to be a Dondalia, and Dumaka, Lusimia Kanga Karchev, and Dangi, did the Kebaka met in the Yam Chigin Sebe, some Tajan, the Yomo be Yambo Danger, Gomguri, SS.
I really want to emphasize the great importance of applying yourself to the training in patience in dealing with one's own afflictions. So give an illustration of when someone, again, is acting towards you in an unkind manner. So we stay with a verbal illustration rather than a physical illustration, but it would be the same. So through one's prior meditations, to having looked at the workings of one's own mind, seeing how it is when one is afflicted and how it feels, and then what happens when one is afflicted, that one expresses it in some way, we then recognize that this is the case with others. So if someone is, say, condescending towards you, or speaks to you in an aggressive manner, whatever it may be, if you have trained well in the meditations on patience, you'll recognize immediately this person's mind is afflicted. And that, if you've trained well, will be sufficient, because this is the utilization of your wisdom, your intelligence. This will be sufficient for your natural care for this person to arise, whomever they are. And in this way, compassion is arising. So through utilizing first your wisdom, which has come about in dependence in your prior meditation, compassion for them will arise. So this can only come in a trying situation if you have trained your mind well beforehand. And in your training, you will recognize that when you talk to someone in a condescending manner, or when you talk to someone in an aggressive manner, it is not because you intentionally set out that day to be proud, to have this inflated sense of self and to take it out on those lesser mortals. Nor did you set out to be angry and to take this anger out on others. Rather, you would have seen with yourself, and therefore you know to be true of this person, merely through habituation, this has arisen and is being expressed, nothing more. Recognizing that this person has no freedom, they didn't choose this, but it has befallen them due to their habituation, then again, you're recognizing this with wisdom, therefore, because your mind is using your intelligence, it's got the space for compassion to naturally arise. And this is only possible because of your training in patience. Then another key area is in the hardships in dealing with the Dharma. So this is the second division. We're concluding the first. This is the second division of patience. So here I take the illustration of trying to develop the wisdom understanding emptiness. One needs to study a lot to come to understand this topic, and it's challenging because the topic is counterintuitive, so it's quite unclear. It seems to be contrary to so much of what we've always known. There's new vocabulary that one has to try and remember and make sense of, so it's difficult. But so we're being difficult. That means there's an afflicted response, a pushing away of something really useful, because the mind's agitated, annoyed. But by being patient, willingly accepting this hardship, meaning not allowing it to overwhelm one, but rather one applies the antidote of reminding oneself of the great benefit that will come through understanding emptiness, one perseveres, one continues. So in this way, there's the patience of willingly accepting hardship in relation to the Dharma, or the patience that is intent on the Dharma. And then the further point to make is to emphasize the central role that patience plays in the cultivation of all good qualities. And this isn't a point that's commonly made, but nevertheless, it is actually the case. Because if you think of when is a mind patient, it is when a mind is trained so that when afflictions potentially could arise, rather, the mind stays virtuous and afflictions do not. And therefore, the mind being free of afflictions and virtuous means one can develop good qualities. Whereas if one is not particularly skilled in patience, the afflictions will readily arise. And if one wants to develop love and compassion, one will not be able to, because afflictions will keep arising. One will not be able to develop wisdom, because afflictions will keep arising. One may be applying oneself to develop calm abiding, single-pointed concentration. But without being skilled in patience, afflictions are going to continue to arise. And earlier I mentioned ethical restraint. So all good qualities, for them to arise, require skill in patience, skill in dealing with afflictions. So these points I'm making here about the great benefits of patience, these you need to take to heart, learn them, reflect on them, so that they readily arise, so that when the afflictions come, your habituation to seeing both the faults of the afflictions and the benefits of patience steers you away from not following the afflictions, but applying antidotes such as patience. It's imperative to really come to recognize for ourselves that we each only have one actual enemy, and that is our afflictions, our afflicted mind. Whether the afflicted mind takes the form of anger, or it arises in the form of attachment, or the form of pride, or jealousy, or the ignorance of confusion, whatever form the afflicted mind arises in, that afflicted mind is our true enemy. It is the cause of our suffering in this life, and it is the cause, through the accumulation of karma, that leads to our suffering in lives to come. And it does, our afflictions don't only lead us to suffer, but they bring suffering into the lives of others. When this is recognized, the deep yearning will come. I want to gain freedom from these afflictions. I never want to have to experience them again. I want to abandon them, but abandon them completely so that they never arise again. I want to abandon the afflictions together with their seeds, become an arat, a foe destroyer.
ma gyaba ne ma le gyaba siguro toba siguro jesa nyomo ba tenji nyemo nyomo ba nyebo tenji nyomo ba pangbar jeba nyomo ba pangba ina pangba tele toba ro da nyomo ba le toba ro tuba se siguro tuba se jesa nyomo ba le tuba re nyomo ba le pangba jesa da nyomo ba le nyebo ten gomba ina gomgande nyebo ten gomba ne gyaba jeba pangwa chigore toba chigore jesa toba jeba Bodhist, de la Bodhist, the Nyomo Badinigi, Nibo Tenji, Nyomo Badle Tuba, Bangba in the Sabana, Bangba in Bodhist, Chesan Dinigi, Nyomo Bali, Nibo Ten, the Yawa Jepam, de Dele, de Bonwa Jepe, Dele Tower, Denichi Jepe, Yamlin Jebadi, the Both, Yamlin and Kansati, the Bodhist, or that Bodhist. Bo said that Bod, the Lord, and Nindo Yoba, Nindo Yobada, and Nido Yobada, Bodhist.
That's the commentary then on the first two lines. Sorry, so the translator didn't make that clear earlier. So that's the commentary on the first two lines, disregarding all, the Tibetan is literally just suffering, but with a plural, disregarding all hardship, pain, and suffering, as well as overcoming enemies such as anger. And so such as refers to the collection of our afflictions. Then the third line, and this is what Gen has just commented on now, such conquerors are heroes. So here the word conqueror is used as like a person who conquers the afflictions. Such a person is a hero. And hero in this context means someone who has a great strength of mind, a courageous heart. That is the kind of person who sincerely commits to abandoning their true enemies, the afflictions such as anger, as well as overcoming all forms of suffering, which tend to come with the afflictions or lead to the arisal of the afflictions. So such a person who commits to doing so and eventually does succeed in conquering these the afflictions, that person is truly suitable to be called a hero, an arat, a foe destroyer, because they have destroyed or conquered the foe or the enemy of the afflictions such as anger. So that then is the meaning of a hero.
Jidebana Jare Samado, Drangoma de Mares, Drangoma de Nyomo Padres. Jizadang Jidibanama, Chik Denige Sosuge, Chike Captation, the Towers, Delia, Mara, Capture, Paji, Jumba in the or the Midibe Law Chambore, Copawores and Lagur was that. Jizandi Pawone Mares, or that. Pawone Mare, Jidim began to me, Sosuge, Neviki, Sosula Megawadi, Pajumidi. The tower, the Lagor, the inner tower in the Mari, town in the Yomobare. The Niki cheating by the pa on the march of the Kosovo in a survey the layout of the Cope Macoreta, Mapuensi, the Magia Power, which they said she got doing on Mother Power Maris, Powody, Yomo by Nimbo Danger, a deep bone Japatella, Power, yes, but a deep Power Maris got that.
Usually, when we hear words like enemies and hero, we would and conquer. So when we would see those three words together in society, what would come to mind is two people engaged in combat, maybe in a military sense or in a sporting sense, but you have two people engaged in combat. And one would seek to conquer the other, to have victory over the other. And that is how this terminology is used in the world. But this is not the meaning at all in the Dharma. The terminology is used, but the meaning is quite different. The enemy is solely one's own afflictions, not the afflictions of others, one's own afflictions. And when one is engaging in battle against them, one is suitable to be called a hero. And when one conquers or gains victory over the afflictions, then one has really gained the title of a hero, someone who has destroyed the foe of the afflictions. So this is the meaning of this terminology in the Dharma.
ko maso bene ko keliji ko rashin shi du ris ko anju pa ko le ne ba ki je ko maso bene ko keliji ko ron du che zo ro ko rashin shi du ris nyo mo ba se di anju de sha kong zhe la so nyo mo ba de le ni bu gang zu na zo ni bo den be zui je je ko me ba so ne ma do du sha sha ba ne me ba gyune cha yo ma ke di na da nyo mo de ki de ma do gyune me ba sha yo ma ras je san din ni de go ma nyo mo ba se di ji ko ni bo den ji in ji mi ji ko me ba su go de di ma ba so gyune me ba che go je san di ni bo den ji me ba so na ba wo cha ge res ko ran xin yi xi zhe ko ga ma jian na ko ge li ji xi zhe mi di an di so ba la ba wo cha ge ma res de ga sen ko ran xin yi xi zhe ko ge li ji ma so na ko xi zhe ro was pe na lama ro la so ba wo se de xi yo ro ji le ya ji ro zu ji ne a ye so ba ne ba wo re ma wa so de mi xi ge sem jian xi yo ro ji le ya an ji ji zu ji a da me ne so yin sen ne ba wo re be sen di ba wo ma res ga sen de nga ba wo ma ro wa di na xin an ji ge mi so su ge mi tin ba de zhao de pa sue ba de le ba wo s ma re ro le ya ji zu xie sue ba na xin ji ba re s ba wo cha ma re s.
So moving to the fourth line, it of course it clearly stays with this analogy of conflict. So if we think of in our own life, where there's someone that we do not get on with, that we regularly have contact with, we have the wish that they will get out of our lives. They probably have the same wish towards ourselves. And perhaps that will happen, and one of us will separate and we won't see each other again. But the afflictions are not like this. If we allow the afflictions to grow within us, to stay within us, they will not dissipate. They will grow in strength. We have to abandon the afflictions and abandon them completely. With someone else, that we don't get on with, we can be nice to them and try and soothe them in that way. But our afflictions, this will never work with them. So with our afflictions, there is only one response, and that is to transform them, to deal with them in a skillful way, very differently from how society has trained us to deal with unwanted circumstance. Because the way the Dharma would get us to look at an unwanted circumstance is, it's impermanent, it will end. If it's a person, they will eventually be out of our lives. The natural process of impermanence will see to that. And that is the meaning of the fourth line. That people that we don't get on with, at some point, our relationship will end. Whether someone goes off in another direction or death comes. So here the analogy is, if the warrior is fighting to kill their external enemies, really they're just trying to kill someone who is going to die anyway. So all they're doing is bringing the inevitable end nearer. This is really pointless. But dealing with one's afflictions, this is lasting benefit.
Adonala Karasungora Sene, Anzuki, Taosu, the Numobare, Rashinika, Tunga Jegi, Tunga Yagi, Gudi Numobare, Numobate, the Nungore, Satan, the Numobate, Pangores, then Numoba Pamala, Numobale, Nimbotenje, and Nichi Comje, Yamlenchi, Yamlenchi Gores, that the Nigi, down the Numobana de la Mangor, the Nigi, and Jeza, the Nimbotenje, Pangores. Denigi nyumo papaya le nyimbo tenji nyamlen jebe kabla ane lusemlia nyebe kanga yungures dene kanga yobe kabla 나 삼도 갈당 거스는 오다 되니기 강아 유어바이나 가요 말에 다 된지기 냠는 제바네 샘제 탐제 라션 니가 된다 개체모 주토야기 랑기 된다 신기 된 타르침바 투야기 투고 되네자 냠는 제고도 되네자 동아디 되네 쇼나 가메 샘베 삼다제 아니 어두스전에 동아디 충충다 계도 쇠진에 도스 냠는 제고레스 되네 냠는 제는 녀모베 녀모 땡제 곰제 냠는 제바이나 되네 언티시 파워레스 다 파워레스 그래서 녀모바디 징하는 저기 라자 참발의 동아디 제게 자원원의 뒤에서 디파 방향에 탑람 배제 냠는 제바데 파워이스 파워레 마도셰 지금 미팅 맞아 미지를 파 지금 좀야 떨야다 좀 말아 소바 제바네 지 로고 첨보나 보고 갈 말에서 도나지 숨도.
In summary with this verse, we need to recognize that our sole enemy is our afflictions. It's not what others say or do to us or our circumstances. It's our afflicted response to that. Recognizing this, then we must apply ourselves to cultivate what we are learning in these teachings and train our mind in the way that I'm guiding you, so that we come to transform our way of thinking. Because what we are not going to be able to stop is challenging circumstances from befalling us, of having problems, suffering, and difficulty. But what we can transform is that we experience them as problems, sufferings, and difficulties. So train yourself to recognize things as, recognize problems as firstly, insignificant, as minor, compared to what really has value. Whatever we experience is fleeting and insignificant. Secondly, to perceive them as actually an opportunity to express my training. This is an opportunity to have a genuinely patient response to this challenge. And thirdly, to encourage yourself, to see yourself as a bodhisattva hero or as an aspirant to be a bodhisattva hero, someone who's striving to transform their mind for the sake of oneself and others. So in these three ways, seeing problems as insignificant, as seeing these as the situation as actually an opportunity, and then thirdly, encourage oneself because one is progressing towards one's great goal. In this way, one will be able to transform how one experiences things by developing this mind of patience.
Dene sorry mene anze chike boxen zeme zhe joro wa zeme zhe du chu ga ji shu bi ne chik na zhe de dang du ling go ro wa di ju ga lo dang du ling be se bo gong go ro be sam na chik jo ro ta na ga san se bo gong go re den se jung gong bin de den se ge zhe na.
So think of some of these high contact sports such as boxing, and there's several of them now. So when you see these usually two people in a ring, I think it's fair to say this isn't a pain-free encounter for either of them. And yet I doubt also in their training there's too much talk about patience.
Yeah. And ji jang ju ka ble pe ji de la phan di chu do a de dang du ling go dang du ma len ba da ti dang du ma len ba a nga ji me la go wa ji sa dang du ling go wa da dang du ling go wa ne de se bu gong go re be sta de ne ane ji ge de so ji ge se be nyam ne ji go re be sa sam la yo si go wa de ne ge nga du pe ne je mo bo san je ma de ge ba she se be nyam ne ji go re be ho ji ko so so ya na ze le ji pa mi shu shen da sa ne di na ze de ga nga de dang du ling go dang du ling je je me ji go ro wa ne ko dang du ling be ge se be nyam ne du wa dang du ling be se be nyam ne ji go re be sa be ge da sam lo na lo yo si ba ro wa da.
But whilst I assume they don't talk too much about patience, this is precisely what they will be training in, because they will be train in receiving pain, in, to use this word, this language, willingly accepting suffering or willingly accepting pain. Because they enter the ring knowing that the other person will land blows. And in a sense, they may even welcome it so as to tire or eventually dominate this other person. So whilst, I doubt they use the language of patience, when we observe it, or at least think about it, we can recognize they are, in terms of dealing with physical pain, they are training in willingly accepting it because they see benefit in doing so. And this is something we can take inspiration from. And certainly this is likely to be the case in warfare as well, in that the military will know that before an encounter that some of them may not return, that they're heading out now, but they are probably not all going to come back, and that those who do are not likely to be in the same physical or mental state that they depart in. So they know this, they accept this, and they rise to the challenge. So this is too something that we can see this being utilized in application in the world.
Inada down lemba kedu soba de ganga de down lemba ganga kedu soje like legor de da kedu sobe down lembe soba de gomgo version soba gomgo male bene zema zyanjina sul nazana di down lenjene and ju down len kedu se pagi de chungju sam kedu soje 가르쳐 왔으면 팔 주야 삼단 거로와 파녀비야 삼단 거로와 마jandige sulja denesina dikedo se down lenje 팔 녀비야 삼단 거로와 니 당도 렘바 키 파제 둥아디 충중디 당도 렘바 키도 서바데 차고할때 가르쳐고 말씀 디 파녀바 제기 삼던 거와 다들 당도 렘베 세바세디 데니 강아디 키도 서네 파르 네바 제기 지금에서 무슨 거로 받아 디 서바리다 제자디 캐버요다 디 데니 당도 렘 술레 직 강아 제베네 직디 당로에 가요 말아 선배 삼다제 파르 네바 마셔 송예디 송아디다 디 서바데 팔을 내버지 뭐 맞아봐대 송투바는 쇠바래 맞아 퍼기대 당도 렌바 잠기 당도 렌베 쇠바 최고말 가진 딘 제모디 추 당도 렌제 팔을 내버지 파 유에기 삼단고래 마제디 추 강아되네 디 당도 렌제 파절을 좀해 쇠 내버지 삼단고라 디지도 고 당도 케도 쇠바데 라나 강아 충주디 케도 쇠바래데 쇠바 공고 말에 파지 팔을 쳐버지 삼단고라 송 내버지에 까고 말에 다른 안주 이체디 당내체스 디니기 녀바티 강아디 케도 수에는 충충에 삼단 델레 셈 마초바 셈 가와라 네베 토 셈가웨 토 네바 토 네베 토 소수기 개외냠을 제도 받으라 안 쇠바 당도림 봐서 당도림 베셔바사 차고로와.
So we think of illustrations in the world from aggressive sports and violence such as warfare. The only part of those encounters that we can say has some application to our training here is that people willingly encounter hardships, knowingly encounter hardships because they believe in the goal. But that is all. So we would not call the training that they have beforehand as a cultivation of patience. Why? Because they are merely training in dealing with physical hardship. They're not training their minds. Because the kind of attitude in the Buddhist training of patience that you're looking to develop for it to be called a training of patience is that the mind becomes undisturbed in the face of hardship. So if it is physical hardship, that one's mind doesn't become disturbed. But in violent sport or warfare, this is not the outcome that the trainers will want. They will want their sports star or their soldier to respond with overwhelming violence. And this is therefore makes it very clear it is not a training in patience. Also, what should be clear is that then training in patience isn't, like in those situations, a mere forbearance with something difficult. It is actually a mental, developing the mind so that one's mind is undisturbed. One progresses towards eventually not experiencing hardship as hardship, suffering as suffering, pain as pain. So it's about transforming the mind. This aspect is what is the training of patience, not merely forbearing and persevering through a difficult situation, but it's the mind not being disturbed in that situation.
양지 소수기 류심래 냠는 집에 개월도 류심래 강아지 체제도 강아지 가요 말씀에 봐 캐도서 충충을 삼다 캐도 쇠시네 안 될이야 니 직접 맞춰 봐지 개위 냠는 무티네 개위 냠는 제바들라 다 동아 당도 렘베 쇠바 냠는 제세야디 제사다 비 강아지 당도 렘바 잡나 캐도 쇠바 잡나 당도 렘베 쇠바 책임도 와 캐도 쇠네 대래 개위념는 제바 무디 제밤 파쇼래 체외 삼로 맞아 대래 체외 송송투바들라 아니 네 송바이나 디 아니 키친 인상고 데네 사들다 다도 렘베스 바세지 데니스 코서라고 맞듯이 다도 렘바 점이디네 다도 렘베스 바 공바 차기오문도.
So there are two components that will make one's response a response worthy of being called one of patience. So the first component is similar to those analogies, where one experiences an unwanted circumstance, but one experiences it though as being something insignificant, because in relation to the great goal, it is insignificant. So that's the first component, that you deal or you experience the hardship. But the unique second component is one's response is with a mind of virtue. So when one experiences an unwanted circumstance of any kind, one doesn't get overwhelmed by it, firstly. Secondly, one's response is a mind of virtue. So not only is the mind not being afflicted, but the mind is virtuous. This is the training of patience, with these two components. The afflictions are not arising, firstly. Secondly, virtuous response follows.
Adin maya dunga dandu limbe sebe nyamlen cheda delia ane sungore dunga gi de dunga rang korong yenden sam da je yenden sam da wi to ne da dunga dandu limbe nyamlen chegore sebe komore nyamlen chegore sade din ma di shugore.
Now the 21st verse, which lists some of the benefits of patience, of training in patience.
Shenya dunga yenden ni gyoye jeba sewa che kowa bala nije ge digla zemna gela gas.
Moreover, suffering does have good qualities. Haughty arrogance is dispelled due to weariness. Compassion arises for beings bound in samsara. Non-virtues refrained from, and virtues delighted in.
Da shenya sede di nyele ya da dunga da de lembe sebe nyamne songsarwa da di membe shenya gyumsen shenda ge samda ju komda di la se shenya dunga yende ni se dunga korong ge dunga dige samda me dunga korong yende gar yo re se samda be na dang de di nyele ya chi shu wa di ga le dunga me la nyejung me se di diga le shurwa adirwa ande dunga me bar ngejung me sade 어제자 지난 dunga의 삼마다네 땅바 있나 dunga 그런 연된 가르 되네 dunga 그런 연된 다제다 dunga지 dunga의 그런 연된의 기초로 편도 여봐지 dunga 그런 삼다네네 지난 dunga의 삼다바 있나 dunga 될라테네 dunga 될라테 지기 타르도의 삼바 가서 이중의 내중 이중비결로 교시 기여를 교시 기여도 대략 봐들다 탈바 톱을 선비 탈바 연된디 탈바 톱되게 삼바 기 두고도 와서 제산 탈바 톱되게 내중 기에디 술리티네 용어선 둥하게 삼바가 때는 용구도 와서 제산 둥하게 연된에 샤스 둥하디 배 야구를 샤스면 삼다 제산 연된 삼다 샤베는 아주 가르쳐라는 배 야구도 삼다에는 니 되어지로 와대 내려야 안지 되어면 지금 말와 되어 야구 민수 삼바는 delya ji samma ji ja ja samdang gwa chesa da dunga delya dunga ko samta de ta ting bo men de ya ko ma sambe samta na sine samta na video ba ki so ne delya an samta ya tang marwa tang mata na ne di dunga ni su sing marwa ma sing ba na de ne ko wa le tar de ge samba ki du ma le chesa pen ye ro ji de ne shi sa de shin ni ma de ne su ju ro o di na jen da de dunga yunde samyodu 가르성 벌었는데 dunga xianya dunga yunde 교회 잡아 세바체스 제가 소수기 dunga 이내수 파도시네 내다 녀모 옹유 주외 라와메 바강아 다 dunga 뇌다 되니기 강아 dunga디 파 삼단데 소소라나 삼단다 소소라나야 되니기 강아 dunga 여바 등에 풍부데 내다 녀모 샤와지도 이 풍부 dunga 라신 레도 와세베 삼단데 여데 당아지 이제 lemrim 나라 손에도 나 동화 될 교회 동화 가서 뒤시 동화 세스로 뒤시 동화 레다 녀모 오늘 중화 아니 주 동화의 동화다 교회 동화 찾아 뇌에 세배 도시 삼다 동화 용의 니수데 시용도 가르시 당원의 니수 지가 하고도 아니 가르여서네 교회 잡아 세워져서 님보민도 선배가 삼다에도 소소 아니 나야 세기래서 나야지 말 소소 나야 자로 그래서 나야다 니니 자바티 세루어서 교회 마야지 세와체스
So the first line, and I'm just going to change a tiny bit, so move this word moreover. So suffering does have maybe further good qualities. So change the word moreover to further down the line. Suffering does have further good qualities. Because this then links back to the 12th verse earlier. The 12th verse earlier. The causes for happiness only occasionally arise. The causes for suffering are overly abundant. Without suffering, there's no determination to emerge. Therefore, mind remains steadfast. So in this 12th verse, the third line brought out the first benefits of suffering. Without suffering, there is no determination to emerge. In other words, this is what's normally translated as renunciation. So it is only through suffering that one develops the wish to gain freedom from suffering. So in our normal Buddhist way of expressing it, one will gain the determination to emerge from suffering into the state of liberation. So this only comes about through really recognizing the subtler levels of suffering. In particular, the subtlest level, the all-pervasive suffering of conditioning, which is for those who've been able to come to the weekend teachings on the Middle Lamrim, where we've been looking at suffering in detail, the first noble truth. There, the all-pervasive suffering of conditionality has been presented. When one recognizes that, one recognizes that there is no abiding value anywhere in cyclic existence. There is nothing here worthy of setting one's heart on. Lasting happiness is to be found when the afflictions together with their seeds are abandoned. That is worthy of striving for. But the only way one gets to develop such an attitude, the attitude of definite emergence, is by coming to recognize all-pervasive suffering of conditioning. And this we only come to recognize through understanding the coarser levels of suffering, and then down through that the motivation of seeing that, to come to recognize the subtler and the subtlest levels of suffering. So this then is the first benefit of suffering, which is that through that one develops definite emergence. So the very purpose here in this verse of looking at the benefits of suffering is that when one understands that there are benefits to suffering, one will be inspired to meditate on patience. But moreover, one will develop an approach of not being so averse to suffering, because you see its upside, the positive side, which is that I can transform it, I can deal with it. So in this way, when suffering is, maybe it's best to say unwanted circumstances are experienced or encountered, when they're encountered, one will not experience them as suffering. One will not have an aversion towards them, but will welcome them because of seeing their benefits. Hence, the benefits that are mentioned here, with the first being from the 12th verse, that definite emergence arises in dependence on knowing suffering.
저로 심매바래데 이내 나절 핑기여바나 어디 당도 렌제 자고로 다디 규모레데 나절 핑기를 빼하고요. 그래서 그런 거 연된죄는 나절이 핑기를 빼하고 자기래선 그런 거 연된 삼다제 먼저 비슷한 거로 와. 안디 나신 안쪽에 강아 랑기 이 동아디게다 제 동아레데 야 말에데 이내 그런래 되니게 니수 삼다 하고 봐 있나 아니 빼 디니기 동아디 하고 해도 동아야 하고 봐래 되네 동아래 털되게 샘핑해 준 게야 판도고도 동아 하고 봐 되니게 하고 봐래 되네 수술이야 나게 봐 자루도 되니게 판도 요래서 이제 판다라 나지게 동아게 내수의 신용 공부 될라 때네 마술이 나게 자야게 아니 지게 아니 저 소수게 내준 삼다야게 캐바디 연구를 제자 동아기 연대 동아 삼다위 동아의 코라 삼다면은 제자 연대 되니게 요래서 두시는 삼다지 공부하게 냠는 제 송도와.
Through going through the meditations on suffering, and here through the lens of the benefits of suffering, you'll change your attitude towards suffering and will no longer experience adverse circumstances in quite the same way. For example, no one willingly puts themselves in pain, in a painful situation. But if a skilled medical practitioner that you have trust in tells you you've got a serious illness and you need to undergo a course of treatment, which may be invasive, it may be uncomfortable, it may be deeply unpleasant, but this is the route by which one will heal, you'll take that, you'll embrace it, you'll be even joyous at that experience. You will willingly go to those appointments, even though it's deeply unpleasant, because you know there's benefit. You've come to recognize through what the skilled medical practitioner told you and your own understanding, your own knowledge, and thereby you embrace that opportunity. You see it as an opportunity. So too then, reflecting well on suffering. You recognize from suffering, the first benefit is the mind of definite emergence arises. Then the second benefit is it challenges our pride, this puffed up sense of superiority, this where we tend to condescend, look down on others. When we suffer, that breaks down. So that's then a second benefit from suffering.
제가 당보 소식이 되는 데니게 동아 삼다 동아지 공부하게 된다 데니게 공부여도 냠용의 토네 소소 현심제 탐제려 코와 동아 용토지 삼다에도 데네들이야 인지기게 돼서 인지기래라고 인지기거래 제가다 소식이 되는 동아 샘비기 동아 니수 삼비게 편인들라 가서 삼나 하고제 등이기 미유디 소식이 미바들 뼈 현심제를 미제 삼다에도 삼전삼주 동안에 단단 임비게 인지기게 돼서 코어발 인지기 제자다 동아기 연대 동아의 삼비게 표현 제보 가려고서는 샘절에 미비 인지기게 돼서
Second and third lines. So through reflecting on the sufferings of samsara, and in particular, the third type of suffering, or pervasive suffering of conditionality, one develops, second line, wariness. This is in relation to cyclic existence, leading to the rise of definite emergence, and one's haughty arrogance, one's pride, is subdued. It's not abandoned, but it's subdued. It's subdued. Through that experience in relation to one's own suffering, one then recognizes the pitiful situation of others, and compassion, the third line, arises for beings bound in samsara, recognizing their situation based on our own experience of having looked at our own situation. Compassion easily arises for others in the same situation.
And then Ndigla Tsemba said, Chesatanga Dungadi, Nesushing, that Dungadi, you carry to the Chumaris and Dipalit in the Chumar. Chesada, Dunga again, Yudi, Dipareshas, how coachene, then Dungagi Nesushing by Dunga, you Dipalit in the Chumar. Tenzada, Dipa the Chigimidos and be Dipa, Pangpi, Dipa, let Zembi, Zemba, Dipa, Majava Dunguri.
The fourth line, our further benefit is through having recognized suffering and given rise to for a wish for freedom from suffering and compassion for others, we then want to stay away from the causes of suffering. So readily, non-virtue is refrained from. Easily, non-virtue is refrained from. Why? Because we are wary of samsara. We want to gain freedom from suffering. So we will refrain from accumulating further causes of suffering.
Dunga sometimes Dunga Yubaha, Hashi, that Dunga de la Tarche, Dele Tarche, and Deva de Dugores, the Deva de Dunyaki words. She's not Deva Dunyaki, Deva de Yukarilla in the Ungersa, and Gava to Ballet in the Ungore. She's not Gava in the Dubai Yungo Hago, Dene Gelaka, gave Chawa Chepa, Yamlan Chiara, gave Yamlan Chepala, Nga. In
addition to refraining from non-virtue, we will strive in virtue. So the fourth line concludes with, and virtue is delighted in. So not only will one easily abandon non-virtue because one has given up on cyclic existence, or it has a determined attitude to abandon the causes of suffering, one with joy will apply oneself to the Dharma with joy. One will engage in cultivating the causes for happiness.
Tiki Dunga Nesu Samtadu, then Nijiki and then Nijiki. Then and the Chiganzu Dunga Miduba in the Dunga you and Dipalet in the Yungo Chesada, Dunga you Dipalet Sem in the Tipa Poyake, Dipalet Sembi Yungri and there. Then Deva Dunga Miduba, Deva to order. She's an Deva you Gavalet in Yunguza, giving Yamna Chavala, Kashin Gubukone, and the Kawakia, and giving Yamna Chaval, Besin Chava Yunguri said that you and Masona, Denigi, Dusus Yunguri said, Sungtua.
So I encourage you then to reflect on these benefits of suffering, so as to change your attitude towards the experience of suffering. The benefits in brief are firstly definite emergence, secondly pride, the abandonment of pride, and thirdly the cultivation of compassion for others who are suffering, and fourthly an ease with turning away, abandoning of non-virtue, and a delight for engaging in virtue. So there are these 5 benefits from reflecting on the benefits of suffering.
Rangi Dunga, the Ganjang, Dunga, the Chumana, Rashi, then I catch him to get some dance at during my Dunga, Chunjulia, Zem Janga, Dunga, your search to somebody, something, and Maje Banana, the young regard, that Dunga Chunju to get some part Zem Jen, and to get Chedo Sebetone, Raja Semja Tamji, San Yoko to be Chudu, and give it Chavala, and besuchi nyamlen chegores, and dungai nesudige some tang to do in some da dungai nesushin yodu, and the tea kishu yenden disuyungres, as on do shine, on the Redwat, the nature that they
So then we can conclude there for tonight. And just to say in summary, I encourage you, it'll be a few weeks, 3 weeks until we come together again on a Wednesday because of the Easter retreat. So in your time, continue your meditations on willingly accepting suffering, dealing with suffering in the way that are presented, not experiencing suffering as being, or these unwanted circumstances as being a big deal. See them as insignificant, which in reality they are, and rather set yourself on cultivating a patient attitude, an attitude that through reflecting on the benefits of transforming suffering, these 5 benefits, that one then embraces hardships because as opportunities to transform one's mind. So we can conclude there for now. But if you have questions, then please do ask. Then thank you, and we'll be together again on the 22nd.